We love to have painters, busboys, and poets. Now, I know that we're accustomed to Black History Month, and you're supposed to go in the history books and try to find yourselves in black somewhere. I thought we'd bring you some live TV tonight. This is a very historic city. This was the epicenter of much of Black history, the Freedmen's Bureau. John is looking back at those people. John did his hand on the only crowd people can't get in because they heard you and Julian were coming. So and he decided he knew exactly what to do. So to keep them from blocking the aisles, he has them on stage, and they're pleased to be on stage since tonight, I'm sure. We have a lot of Black history. For example, I have a bill that is in the process now, finally, rehabilitating the home of Carter G. Woodson, who is the originator of Black history in our country. That's going to be a place to go, just like the monument, just like George Washington's home. But the fact is that there is a lot of Black history walking around in the streets every day. You don't have to wait until the new museum on African American history comes up. We were just there last week for the groundbreaking. There's lots of living Black history, but there's not a lot of living Black history of the kind you're going to hear from tonight. Now, they will forgive me if I call them living legends of the civil rights movement, because they were very special and very young. They first came to notice when the movement was barely a movement at all. It took a series of folks, some of them from the traditional civil rights organizations, some of them from civil rights organizations that were born of the movement, for the movement, and unlike many youth movements, it didn't insist upon remaining until middle age. It was here, it did what it had to do, and then it was gone. But many of those who made American history, made the youth movement, are here and continuing to work as human rights leaders. So what I'm going to do tonight, let me tell you how it's going to work. I'm going to have a few questions to the moderator for my two friends here, tell you how we first met, but I'm not going to ask all the questions. Someone will bring the microphone out. You'll get your opportunity to speak with them as well. Julian was saying he's glad to see so many young people here. So young people, there's a sense that sometimes young people aren't as interested in the civil rights movement. Well, I have to look at this audience of people of all ages, and you will see that at least when you have Julian Bond and John Lewis, people really do want to hear. I first met Julian and John when we were both young people in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. The difference between them and me is I came in the summers and schools out of Yale Law School. They were Southerners who took time out from college to start and to do lots of other things. That became the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. John was at American Baptist College and at Fisk. Julian was at Morehouse. These two men are veterans of the most risky campaigns in the South, where the South was terrorist territory, where the whole notion of coming forward and demanding equal rights put your life in danger. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was dubbed by someone the stormtroopers of the civil rights movement, because they were young people, young and foolish enough to go into parts of the South where no one had dared raise the civil rights mantle, and there was reason not to raise it. Their backgrounds are quite different, but quite representative of students in SNCC. The students in SNCC were all in college. That set them really apart. In the 1960s, most blacks, indeed most whites, hadn't yet gone to college. John grew up on a family farm in Alabama. Julian was the son of distinguished educators, and SNCC was full of people like that and all that was in between. I'm going to tell you just a few things about where John and Julian came from, because you can ask yourself the kinds of things you want to know. John represents the 5th District of Georgia, most of Atlanta, and then some. Since 1986, he got to Congress before I did. He had served in the Atlanta City Council. Julian served 4 terms in the Georgia House and 6 terms in the Georgia Senate. I will ask Julian a question about how you had a hard time getting into the Georgia House after being elected, because by that time I was in New York and wrote an amicus brief when he had to go all the way to the Supreme Court to come his seat. I will also ask him about another honor he had, as the first African American to be nominated for Vice President of the United States. He has had a lifelong, he has had a lifetime of work in the civil rights movement. Julian will have to tell us how he went from being sick to being the board chair of the NAACP. That's what he did. He's now a professor in the history department at the University of Virginia, and he's a distinguished scholar in residence at American University. My own role in SNCC will come out in the questions I ask. So first let me start with the formation of SNCC. Why in the world would young people who were among the few, particularly in the South, to get to go to college, decide to go to Shaw University to form the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee? And by the way, I should say that these are the 2 SNCC leaders you know best. But among those who I think my friends would want mentioned were Stokely Carmichael from Howard, Charles McGee, who led student protests at South Carolina State, Charles Young, who organized sit-ins in Charlotte, North Carolina, Julian Bond, who was a leader in Atlanta, and then there was an extraordinary Nashville student movement, Diane Nash, James Lawrence, John Lewis, Bernard Lafayette, James Bevel, and Marion Barrett, who was the first chair of state. John and Julian, did you come to SNCC from sit-ins? How did you find yourself? You were fortunate enough to go to college. Find yourself as members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Take the time out from college.
If you will, let me speak without being heard. Let me try this one. First, let me thank you for bringing us together. It's a great pleasure. This is one of my oldest and best friends, and I don't see him as often as I would like to. It's great to be with him on an occasion like this. And I've done this with John before, and the thing that is remarkable about him is he has almost a perfect memory. If I ask you what day was the March on Washington, a lot of people here say August 28th. If I tell you what day was the Freedom Ride, what was it?
May 4th, 1961.
What day did you go to Birmingham?
Well, we arrived in Birmingham Wednesday morning, May 7th.
Thank you too, Eleanor, for mentioning those names you did, but there are at least 3 sick people in the audience here. I see Charlene Cram. Stand up, Charlene. Joan Stumpfire, who's a freedom rider. Stand up, Joan. I believe Judge Robinson is back there. Is he not? You're red. So, we are everywhere. I came to Raleigh and the Raleigh meeting where SNCC was formed because I was in the Atlanta student movement, and we got a letter from a woman named Ella Baker. No one knew who she was. And Dr. King, first signed by Ella Baker and Dr. King, of course we knew who Dr. King was, inviting us to come to this meeting in Raleigh, North Carolina. And Ella Baker, I now know, wrote the letter, and there was something in it that caught our attention that said the movement, the meeting would be youth-oriented. And so we borrowed a car from some adults in Atlanta, we drove up to Raleigh, we stayed in dormitories at Shaw, we met this amazing array of other young people, most of whom were only newspaper figures to us. We had all seen Diane Nash in the papers or on TV. We had seen other students from other parts of the South where they'd been sitting on TV or in newspapers. But all of a sudden we were seeing them in the flesh, and they were so much like us. They were black college students going to black colleges. They knew, all of us, no matter where you're going to school or what you're studying, that the system of apartheid cheapened our college degrees. And my degree from Morehouse was losing its luster because of where I lived and the society around me. That no matter how brilliant I was or how smart I was or how I achieved, the society would not let me achieve as I could have done or should have done. And so striking a blow at the lunch counters was the beginning of many, many ways to make that happen, and that's what brought me to Raleigh.
Well, Eleanor, let me thank you so much for bringing us together. It's good to be here with my good friend and my brother Julian. In SNCC we used to call ourselves a circle of trust, obeying the brothers and sisters. When I was growing up, I saw the signs that said white in color in the little town of Troy, in Tuskegee, Montgomery, and I didn't like those signs. I resented segregation and racial discrimination. When I was 15 years old in the 10th grade, I heard of Rosa Parks, I heard Dr. King on the radio, and it seemed like he was saying, John Robert Lewis, you two can do something, and I wanted to do something. And Dr. King inspired me, Rosa Parks inspired me. And when I went away to school in Nashville, for an entire school year, at 6:30 p.m., a group of students from Fisk University, Tennessee State, Vanderbilt University, American Baptist, Harvard Medical College will meet every evening, and some high school students from Pearl High would come and study the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence, study what Gandhi attempted to do in South Africa, what he accomplished in India. We studied the great religions of the world. Jim Lawson became almost like a saint. He was this unbelievable young man born in Ohio, became part of the student Methodist movement, traveled to India, and he taught us the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence. We had test sit-ins, Julian, in Nashville in the fall and winter of 1959. So we were ready when the sit-in started in Greensboro, North Carolina. We were ready to protest, and that it just created this unbelievable urge for me to do something and be involved. And my mother and my father told me, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, don't get in the way, don't get in trouble. Then I would ask them about the signs and all. So that's the way it is. But Dr. King inspired me to get in the way and to get in trouble. And you see like-minded people. And being in school in Nashville, we had a lot of African students at Fisk, some at American Baptist. And the students from Africa were saying, the whole of Africa will be free before we get a hamburger and a lunchtime. And NACP had this slogan, free by 63. So we had to do something. We had to move.